July 23, 1957. 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. 11:47 p.m. 400 people were in the street. Anger was at its peak. Blood was about to be spilled. Bumpy Johnson walked into the crowd, said 7 words, and Harlem experienced the quietest night in its history. The glass bottle hit the pavement but didn't break. Someone had thrown it from the back of the crowd. A Molotov cocktail, unlit, rolling across wet cobblestones until it stopped against the storefront. No one picked it up. No one threw another. Police sirens were 3 blocks away. Getting closer. Bumpy Johnson stood in the center of 125th Street, hands at his sides, wearing a dark suit that looked black under the streetlights. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't moving. He was simply there, and 400 people who had been screaming seconds ago were now silent. The riot that was supposed to burn Harlem never started. What Bumpy said, no newspaper printed. What he did, no police report documented. But everyone on that street remembered. And for the next 20 years, when people in Harlem talked about power, they talked about that night. How did it get here? 48 hours earlier, a 17-year-old boy named Marcus Webb had been beaten by 2 NYPD officers outside a grocery store on 123rd Street. The beating was public. Witnessed by dozens. Marcus hadn't resisted. He'd been buying cigarettes for his grandmother. The officers said he'd been disrespectful. They said he'd reached for something in his jacket. They said a lot of things that the witnesses didn't remember seeing. Marcus Webb died in Harlem Hospital 36 hours later. Ruptured spleen. Internal bleeding. The hospital recorded it as injuries sustained during arrest. The police report called it necessary force during apprehension of suspect. By the evening of July 23rd, Harlem knew. And Harlem was ready to burn. Bumpy Johnson heard about it while sitting in the back room of a social club on 132nd Street. He was playing dominoes with 3 men who ran numbers in different parts of Harlem. None of them were talking about Marcus Webb. They were talking about money, routes, territory, the ordinary business of survival. Someone knocked on the door. A kid, maybe 15, breathless. "Mr. Johnson, there's gonna be trouble on 125th tonight. People are gathering. They're saying it's time." Bumpy placed a domino on the table. He didn't look up. "Time for what?" "Time to make them pay." The 3 men at the table stopped playing. They looked at Bumpy, waiting. Bumpy stood. He put on his hat. He walked to the door. "Where you going?" one of the men asked. 125th Street. "You gonna stop it?" Bumpy didn't answer. He walked out. This moment mattered. 125th Street at 11:30 p.m. looked like a war zone preparing for battle. Men stood in clusters, some holding bats, some holding bottles filled with gasoline. Women were there too, older women who remembered other riots, other beatings, other boys who didn't come home. The anger wasn't manufactured. It was earned. Decades of earned. A man named Clarence Davis stood on a milk crate, shouting. He was known in the neighborhood. Ran a barbershop. Respected. Angry. "They killed that boy for nothing!" Clarence's voice carried across the crowd. "They beat him to death in front of his own people and they're gonna call it justified. When do we say enough?" The crowd roared. Someone threw a bottle. It shattered against the streetlight. "Tonight!" someone shouted. "Tonight we make them listen!" More bottles. More shouting. The crowd was becoming something else. Something that couldn't be reasoned with or stopped by asking nicely. Police cars were staging 3 blocks south. 20 officers in riot gear. Waiting. They knew what was coming. Everyone knew. That's when Bumpy Johnson arrived. He didn't run. He walked. Through the crowd. People moved aside without thinking about it. Not because he pushed. Because he was there. He reached the center of 125th Street, where Clarence Davis stood on the milk crate, and he stopped. Clarence saw him. The shouting stopped mid-sentence. The crowd noticed. 400 people gradually going quiet because Bumpy Johnson was standing there, not saying anything, just existing in the space where violence was supposed to happen. Someone in the back yelled, "Bumpy! You gonna help us burn this place down?" Bumpy didn't turn toward the voice. He looked at Clarence Davis. "Get down from there," Bumpy said. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just a statement. Clarence hesitated. Then he stepped down. Bumpy stood where Clarence had been standing. He didn't get on the milk crate. He stood on the street, at eye level with everyone else, and he looked at the crowd. The police sirens were 2 blocks away now. Subscribe and leave a comment. The most important part of this story is still ahead. Marcus Webb was 17 years old, Bumpy said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. He was buying cigarettes. 2 officers beat him to death. That's what happened. The crowd murmured. Some shouted agreement. And now you're going to burn down your own neighborhood, Bumpy continued. You're going to destroy the stores where you buy food. You're going to give them exactly what they want. An excuse. We can't just do nothing, someone shouted. Bumpy turned toward the voice. Who said anything about doing nothing? Silence. You think burning down Joe's grocery helps Marcus Webb's grandmother? You think breaking windows makes those officers pay? You think the people who killed that boy care if you destroy your own street? No one answered. They want you to riot, Bumpy said. They want you angry and stupid and easy to put down. They want you to give them a reason to bring more cops, more guns, more control. And you're about to hand it to them. A woman in the crowd, older, her voice breaking. Then what do? We can't just let them kill our children. Bumpy looked at her. No. We can't. He reached into his jacket. The crowd tensed. Some people stepped back. But Bumpy didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is the name of a lawyer, Bumpy said. Civil rights lawyer. Works out of the NAACP office in Manhattan. He's already on his way to Harlem Hospital to collect Marcus Webb's medical records. By tomorrow morning, he'll have statements from every witness who saw what happened on 123rd Street. He held up the paper. This is how you fight. Not with bottles. With documentation. With lawyers who know how to make them hurt in ways that actually matter. The crowd was listening now. Really listening. You want justice for Marcus Webb? Bumpy's voice was still calm. Still controlled. Then you do it the way that scares them. You make them answer questions under oath. You make them defend themselves in court. You make them write checks to Marcus's family. You make them pay in ways that last. This decision would affect everyone. Someone in the crowd. A younger man, maybe 25, stepped forward. And what if the lawyer doesn't do anything? What if it's just more of the same? More promises and no justice? Bumpy looked at him. Then we revisit this conversation. But we do it after we've tried everything that keeps your neighborhood standing. Because if you burn this street tonight, there's nothing left to fight for tomorrow. The police sirens stopped. The cars had arrived. Officers were getting out, forming a line at the end of the block. Riot shields. Batons. Waiting. The crowd noticed. Tension rose again. Someone picked up a bottle. Bumpy didn't turn around to look at the police. He kept his eyes on the crowd. You have a choice, he said. You can give them what they expect. Or you can show them something they're not ready for. What's that? The young man asked. Discipline. The word hung in the air. Bumpy stepped down from where he'd been standing. He walked to the unlit Molotov cocktail that had rolled to a stop near the storefront. He picked it up. Held it so everyone could see. Then he poured the gasoline out onto the street. Slowly. Deliberately. The liquid spread across the wet pavement, mixing with rainwater, becoming nothing. He set the empty bottle down carefully. Stood up. Looked at the crowd. Go home, Bumpy Johnson said. 7 words. That's all. No threats. No promises. No explanation. Just, go home. And the crowd began to disperse. Not all at once. Not happily. But one person turned and walked away. Then another. Then groups of 3 and 4. Within 5 minutes, 125th Street was emptying. The police officers stood at the end of the block, confused, their riot shields lowered slightly because there was nothing to riot against anymore. Clarence Davis approached Bumpy. You just stopped a war. Bumpy shook his head. I delayed one. There's a difference. What happens when the lawyer doesn't deliver? Then we'll see, Bumpy said. But at least we'll still have a neighborhood to fight for. This was the moment everyone would remember. The lawyer's name was Theodore Marshall, and he did deliver. Not immediately. Not cleanly. But 6 months later, the 2 officers who beat Marcus Webb were suspended without pay pending a civil trial. A year later, Marcus Webb's grandmother received a settlement from the city. It wasn't justice, not really, but it was something. And it happened because Bumpy Johnson stopped a riot with 7 words and an empty bottle. But that's not why people remembered that night. They remembered it because of what happened 3 weeks later. A police sergeant named Donald Riley, one of the officers who'd been at the scene on July 23rd, watching the crowd that never became a riot, was found beaten unconscious in an alley off 128th Street. His injuries matched the ones Marcus Webb had sustained. Ruptured spleen. Internal bleeding. Riley survived. Barely. He retired from the force 6 months later and moved out of New York. No one was ever arrested for the beating. No witnesses came forward. The investigation went nowhere. But everyone in Harlem understood. Bumpy Johnson had told them to go home. He told them to wait. He told them to be disciplined. He hadn't said he would wait. Share and subscribe. This is how stories like this survive. After that night, police in Harlem operated differently. Not because policy changed. Not because new laws were passed. But because they understood something fundamental had shifted. Bumpy Johnson didn't control Harlem through fear. He controlled it through something more dangerous, consensus. When he told 400 angry people to go home, they went home. That meant when he decided something else needed to happen, it would happen. Quietly. Inevitably. Without riot or spectacle or warning. The empty bottle from that night, the Molotov cocktail that was never lit, ended up in a barber shop on 126th Street. Clarence Davis kept it on a shelf behind the register. He never explained why. But customers who remembered that night would see it and nod. It meant something. It meant Bumpy Johnson had shown them a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't need to burn anything down to be felt. Bumpy died in 1968. His funeral procession stretched for blocks. Thousands of people lined the streets. Not because he was loved, though some did love him. But because he was respected in a way that outlived fear. Years later, when people told stories about Harlem in the 1950s and 60s, they always came back to that night. July 23, 1957. The riot that never happened. And they always ended the story the same way. With 7 words. Go home. That's how you stop a war. Not with force. With presence. With the understanding that real power doesn't need to prove itself. It just needs to exist. The lawyer, Theodore Marshall, kept Bumpy's folded paper in his office drawer for the rest of his career. When reporters asked him years later about the Marcus Webb case, he would mention that night on 125th Street. How a riot was scheduled. How it never happened. How someone had made a single phone call to him at 11:52 p.m., July 23rd, asking if he could help. Marshall never said who made that call. But he kept the paper. In 1963, during the March on Washington, a young organizer approached Bumpy at a Harlem fundraiser. The organizer asked about tactics. About how to channel rage into action without losing control. Bumpy took out a cigarette. Lit it. Took one drag. "Show them you can stop," he said. "Then show them you can start. But never show them both at once." The organizer didn't understand. Not then. 3 years later, after the Watts riots, after Detroit, after Newark, the same organizer was interviewed on television. Asked about the difference between effective protest and destruction. He repeated Bumpy's words almost exactly. He didn't credit the source. But in Harlem, people knew. The empty bottle remained on Clarence's shelf until the barbershop closed in 1985. When they cleaned up the shop, Clarence's grandson asked what to do with it. "Break it," Clarence said. "The story's all that matters now." But he didn't break it. He kept it. Because some objects carry weight that outlives their purpose. Bumpy Johnson never spoke about that night publicly. When asked years later why he stopped the riot, he gave different answers to different people. To a journalist, bad for business. To a preacher, wrong time. To a young man who wanted to be like him. Because I could. All three were true. None were complete. The real answer was simpler and more complicated. He stopped it because 400 people would have destroyed themselves to feel powerful for one night. And Bumpy understood that real power isn't what you do when you're angry. It's what you don't do. The 7 words became legend. Not because they were clever or poetic, but because they were final. When Bumpy Johnson told 400 people to go home, the conversation was over. Not because he threatened. Not because he begged. But because everyone understood that if they stayed, they would be choosing to oppose him. And no one wanted to find out what opposing Bumpy Johnson actually meant. That's the difference between fear and inevitability. Fear makes you wonder what might happen. Inevitability makes you know. On July 23, 1957, Harlem learned the difference. And the lesson lasted decades.